in the Workplace has been translated to several Indian languages, and Racecourse Road is her first novel.
I could see all the problems. Firstly, can we just dim these lights? I'm sorry to all preceding speakers, but this is absolutely crazy bright. Yeah, a little more. And more. I think both Seema and I glow enough to be in a little bit of darkness. Yes. So thank you, Seema, for coming for this session.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back in Calcutta, and thank you all of you for showing up for this session. It's great to see you all.
So you're a Calcutta girl in a way. We like claiming whoever we can.
Absolutely. I grew up here. I went to school and college here. I started my career in Calcutta with the Anand Bazar Patrika. I worked first with Sunday Magazine, and then I moved on to the Telegraph. And with the Telegraph, I then moved to Delhi. So yes, I am a Calcutta person. You can claim me as much as you want.
Thank you. We'll gladly do that. So, considering you're a Calcutta girl and considering that you were a journalist and you wrote non-fiction, you'd written a book, Women on Top, what made you write this book about Delhi? You were a late entrant into Delhi comparatively, and write a book, a thriller, a political thriller, fiction. Was it a difficult transition?
You know, it wasn't that difficult because in my journalism, I had covered politics. So even though I didn't live in Delhi until about maybe 30 years ago, I did travel a lot. I did interview a lot of politicians, cover general elections and all of that. And, you know, when you cover politics for a magazine or a newspaper, the stuff that you put into your reports is always something that you can back up, that you can prove. But there's a lot of stuff that you can't really prove one way or the other, but you know is true. So all through my journalistic life, I think I was just saving up all that stuff with the view that one day I would use it in fiction. And when I finally had a chance to do that, it was great fun to do that.
So Seema's written 2 books, and one is the sequel of the other. Racecourse Road was the first one, which sets up these characters and the family of Birendra Pratap Singh, as well as the ecosystem of politics around Racecourse Road. I won't give away much, so we have to tread carefully. After all, it's a thriller. And the sequel is about Asha Devi, his daughter, who then comes into the role of the Prime Minister. So there are lots of characters, some thinly camouflaged, which leads to a lot of guessing. There's a rural-based politician who loves his goats, which gives us a lot of fodder for thought. There is a lady in a sari from an eastern state, a crumpled sari, who's called Sukanya Sarkar. And there are several other similar characters who are there. So I wanted to ask you, did the characters come first and then did they fit into your plot?
You know, it's the plot that always comes first because I wanted to tell a story. You know, I'll start with Racecourse Road because that was the first book in the series. And I was actually approached by David Davedar of Aleph, who wanted me to write a political thriller because he said there was nobody who had written like an insider's view of Racecourse Road and how politics functions, how government functions, how the Prime Minister's office and home is set out. So I think with that kind of brief in mind, I kind of fleshed out the story about this Prime Minister who's assassinated when the book opens and the kind of power struggle that's set off within his family, which is a step family because he has 2 sons, and then there's a step sister, who is the younger one, but the charismatic one. And not to go into it in too much detail, but the first...
That also has never happened in Indian politics, step families.
Step families, yes. And the girl is the one who actually becomes the Prime Minister in Madam Prime Minister in the second book in the series. But, you know, when you talk about thinly camouflaged characters, Malavika, it's like this. I mean, it's not like I would base a character completely on A, B, or C. But what happens is that throughout your working life and even through your social interactions with people in your immediate milieu, you kind of pick up on people's mannerisms, on the way people speak, on their little foibles, on the little things, and even probably without realizing it, you use it in your writing. And so I wouldn't say that, character A is exactly so and so or whatever, but sure, there are shades of real politicians. Like, for instance, a lot of people say that Asha Devi reminds them of Priyanka Gandhi, but I didn't have Priyanka Gandhi in mind when I wrote it, and I frankly don't think that she's that similar.
I don't think so. It's someone
Yeah.
who's done a very basic reading of the
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
She's
very
the
different.
unique character
Yeah,
in the book
absolutely, yeah.
who
I hope
seems
so.
fictional. Look, she's a good-looking, well-dressed prime minister, and which is since I wanted to bring this up later, but the one time had to very, very willingly suspend disbelief was the way the cabinet looked. And how young they were. They were all under 15. There was a rash of square jaws and aquiline features. I mean, it was the kind of cabinet that would make Justin Trudeau feel a little dumpy.
You've forgotten the Rajiv Gandhi days. I mean, how old was Rajiv Gandhi when he became prime minister? How old was Arun Singh or these kind of people?
Actually, we've forgotten those
You've
times.
forgotten those
and
times.
do you
We're
blame
so
us?
used to. We're so used to older people now that we've forgotten a time when we did have a young and good-looking prime minister, and the cabinet wasn't bad-looking too.
No, not at all.
So it's maybe I'm harking back to my youth.
Okay, so it wasn't wish fulfillment. It was rather you going
Well,
back
maybe
to
there's an element of wish
a more
fulfillment too.
beautiful time. Let's
Yes,
say.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So, speaking of the eastern side, there's an alok rai, there's a romance within the book as well. So, we had Javed Saab here a little while earlier, and one of his dialogues, I think, goes, "Isme romance bhi hai, action bhi hai, tragedy bhi hai." So, is that the great balancing act a good political thriller has to have?
I take your point that there has to be a little bit of masala in every book. But the point is, when you're writing the story of a young girl who's like 29 entering into her 30s, and well, in the previous book, she'd had a kind of a difficult breakup with a boyfriend. I think the most normal thing is to give her a love interest, because most women of that age are open to love, and there is attraction that develops between people who are working in close quarters. So it kind of was a natural progression. It's not like I thought that, okay, now I have to have a love interest in the book.
A big love interest
Yeah.
Ghusana hai.
Yeah.
No, to be fair, it is quite organic.
It's quite organic, yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, staying with the family and the politics of Racecourse Road, you've taken a lot of incidents from, so that the Racecourse Road sets the characters. And this book reads more like almost like a script, because you have one episode after another after another. So the books are 4 years apart, is that right?
Oh, well, they're not actually. You know, what happened was, I mean, I began writing Madam Prime Minister as soon as Racecourse Road. I finished publicizing it, which took like a year. But then the pandemic happened, and I didn't want to publish my second book in the midst of the pandemic, because I thought I wanted to be able to do in-person events to kind of publicize, and here I am. And so I kind of delayed it for a bit, though Penguin had the manuscript for a while, but we decided to hold on to it and bring it out in December of last year. But, you know, what man proposes, God disposes. As soon as the book came out, we had Omicron. So I ended up doing a lot of the publicity on Zoom anyway. So it was really no point postponing the book for as long as I did.
So this is one of your first few events for the
Yes,
book. You went to Jaipur as well.
I went to the Jaipur Literary Festival as well. And I've done a few events at bookstores in Delhi, but those are obviously smaller events. But it's nice to actually, you know, meet people, to be able to see faces, to be able to sign books for real people rather than just go to a bookshop, sign and leave them behind you. I mean, it's a different feeling altogether. So I'm very glad you invited me for this.
You know, always a pleasure to have a nice thriller in the menu. So, you know, just again going back to the session before us, a lady at the end of the session asked the panelists about women with agency as villains. So there's a lot of the characters in the book, Asha Devi being the main protagonist. A lot of the characters are women, and it's very organically so. It's not a statement, but it is these women who are powerful and lead a certain life, and for whom the adrenaline of success and failure is all that drives them. So some of them are inspired characters. This is something I noticed about your thriller, political thriller. Do you think this is where there's a difference between your book and some of the ones we've read from the West?
Could you give me an example?
Like Lekar, it's a testosterone world,
Yeah.
spy thrillers. I mean,
Well,
I know
it's-
we are headed towards a female James Bond, but still.
Well, the book is very much a creature of its milieu. It's a very Delhi book. I mean, it's about the way the world of Delhi functions, the way Racecourse Road works, about government. There are a few bits about Davos and a few bits about state elections and all of that. But it is a very Delhi-centric book because, that is the world that I'm most familiar with. And they
But
say,
does
write
it have
what
so
you
many
know.
powerful women?
In Delhi? Well, I mean, you had Sonia Gandhi, who was like the most powerful woman in this country before the BJP came to power. So there are powerful women, and we are sitting in a state where we have Malavika Banerjee as chief minister, who is surely the most powerful woman in this region. So I don't think there's a paucity of powerful women in politics. We've had Vasundhara Raje, who's been chief minister of Rajasthan twice. We've had Jayalalitha, who's been, pretty powerful in her time. So I don't think, and if you go further back, we've had Indira Gandhi. So there are powerful women in different, kind of areas.
I would like to think it's because it's written by a woman as well. These women actually are seen. Because yes, all the women you have mentioned have existed, but typically in a thriller, they somehow are conspicuous by their absence.
That's true. They're more like the second lead rather than the actual
Yes.
protagonist. That's very true.
Yeah. So staying with there is the other strand of the novel, which is about the media wars.
Yes.
But before we come to that, the first book talks about Asha Devi and her rocky relationship and her natural charisma. So, these two books have different flavors somehow, because that's more about her and her journey, but this is very episodic. So what changed between the two?
The first book was, I think, more character-driven, and this book is more plot-driven. Because I think I used the first book to kind of build up the characters, to tell their stories, to establish their interpersonal relationships. And when it came to the second book, I also wanted to do something different. I wanted a different pace. I wanted a different style, because I didn't want the second book to be just a continuation of the first one. So it's far more of a thriller. There's like a terrorist attack, there are surgical strikes. So there's a lot of action in the book. So it's really written like a thriller, whereas the first one was written more like a novel, I think.
Yeah, and I may be wrong, of course, but you seem to have greater fun writing Madam Prime Minister.
Actually, I had
So
great fun writing
there's
the
this
first one too.
thuggish man who is in Tihar jail and then compares it to Shiva Som in Hua Hin because, it's like a detox. So you've had a lot of fun writing the whole
Absolutely,
thing.
yeah.
So can you talk us through, using some of the
Yeah.
experiences you've had and putting it into a fictional narrative?
Well, the Shivasom bit was, of course, a little bit of a fun I was having. There's this character who's arrested and sent to Tihar jail, and he thinks that, this is the best detox he'll get because he's not allowed to drink alcohol, he can't smoke, the food has no fat, and he has to exercise twice a day. So it's like being in a spa, but the only thing is that he's actually in a prison. So that was a fun thing. But I actually had great fun writing this book, but I had fun writing the previous one too, because they're two completely different genres, even though the story is being continued. And this one, it's strange you call it episodic, because a lot of people say that they read it and they think of a web series.
I was wanting to say that, yeah.
A lot of people feel that. But I have to say, I didn't write it like a web series. It just kind of turned out like that, because my idea was that, at the end of each chapter, there should be some sort of a cliffhanger that makes you want to go on to the next chapter and read on, rather than, put it down and say, okay, I'll read it tomorrow or day after. So I think that's probably what gives it a slightly web series
So
or
you mean you were
OTT
aiming at
platforms.
binge reading?
Binge reading, absolutely. That's a good phrase.
So the other half, as I said, is about media wars. So that is really very close to what you do. And you've been a media person for, what, 2 decades, 3 decades?
About 30 years probably.
Okay, 30 years. So what do you see is the difference in media over these 3 decades? And we'll come to the book after that, but your personal experience.
Well, you know, when I joined the media, I joined Anand Bazar Patrika. It was as a print journalist. So, and there wasn't that much TV journalism happening in those days. There was really just Doordarshan. And there was a lot of focus on news gathering. But what I find over the last decade or so is that the focus on news gathering has kind of gone, and people are more focused on opinion journalism. Like everybody just wants to have television debates where you have 4 people shouting at each other and the anchor shouts louder than anybody else. There's no sense in which that you're learning anything when you watch these TV debates, because they just take what has happened during the day as a starting point and just talk about it rather than tell you what actually happened. There are a few TV channels which still do that, but on the whole, it's become like talk radio. And that's very different from the kind of journalism I did when I started out, because it was always about going out, talking to people, filing reports. There was a lot of oversight. We had editors who actually insisted that we prove everything that we wrote, that we could back up what we wrote with evidence. I think that kind of rigor, it may exist in some major newspapers, but I think on the whole, that rigor has disappeared in journalism.
So would you say that's to do with this race against time, the breaking news phenomenon?
Oh, well, it's race against time, and it's also the nature of 24-hour journalism, in that you bring out a newspaper once a day, so you can possibly, you know, take your time and ruminate about what you're going to write. 24/7 television, you have to produce a bulletin every hour, every half an hour. So it's a beast that needs feeding, and I think what has happened is that because this is a beast that needs feeding, you're continuously throwing red meat at it without wondering about how it's going to affect the news diet of the nation. And it's a very worrying development, because we've created a whole audience which really appreciates nothing more than these slanging matches and has no patience to actually sit through a news report of any kind.
Okay, so I just got distracted by
Don't
that,
worry.
sorry. So we have these 2 characters, Gaurav and Manisha, who are the news anchors. One has a history of having reported from Kargil. She occasionally gets her makeup and lighting slightly wrong.
I actually have never mentioned Kargil in the book. This is
Kashmir. She's an authority on Kashmir, okay, which is where Kargil is. And there's another person called Gaurav who has many small screens on his big screen and doesn't let anybody speak and is given to making wild statements and conclusions at the start of his telecast.
I wonder who that could be.
So I wonder who these 2 people are. But one of the most delightful parts of the book is the competition between them.
Yes.
So this media war between media personalities. Can you just talk us through how much fun did you have writing that?
You know, I actually enjoyed writing the media bits, because that's a bit of a bugbear of mine about how media is kind of deteriorated is the wrong word, but kind of changed so completely.
Morphed, basically.
Yeah, it's like turned into something quite different from the news channels we used to have in the old days. And to be honest with you, I don't watch that much news TV, because I don't have the patience to kind of watch people shouting at each other all the time. So I end up watching CNN or BBC or whatever and get my news from newspapers. But it's the competition you refer to. There's this kind of race to be the fastest, to be the quickest to deliver what is essentially non-news. And in that, a lot of accuracy and a lot of insight kind of disappears. And in the book, I've tried to kind of bring out how we're kind of losing out in this constant race to be the quickest to bring you something, which is what both these people actually concentrate on.
Yeah, and the other aspect of this is the celebrity anchor. So that is also part of the whole, the whole, I don't know what is the less pejorative way of saying this, but the whole transformation of media. A few years ago, Mark Tully had come to the festival and he commented on this, that when the anchor becomes the news, then news is in trouble. So
Well,
what
that's
are your
happened.
thoughts?
I mean, that ship has sailed, I think. The anchors are the news, aren't they? Whether it's in Hindi news, I mean, I'm not that familiar with Bengali channels, but I'm sure that's the case here as well. And certainly English channels, when you talk about, people who talk over guests and have, so many windows, the sad part is at least 3 names or 4 names come to mind when you say that, because that is what English news TV has become. Right?
Yes, it has, but one name comes slightly more than the others. We may see some of him later today when Cyrus and Anubhav are on stage.
That should be fun.
This is a sneak peek into what's ahead in the evening.
Yes.
Now, the other thing about the book is it's all of this, but there are some very telling parts where it is more than just a racy paperback airport thriller. So, for instance, there's this part where Alok says, he's talking about Sukanya Sarkar, the leader from the east of India, who is one of those nightmarish coalition partners. And he said, I've seen this sort of thing time and again. Women who are trying to make it in a man's world build this hard husk around their inner selves as a sort of defense mechanism. They try to project an image of being tough and unapproachable, of being a hater, as you put it. Again, to hark back to a session we had 3 years ago about Jayalalitha, Malavika Banerjee, and Mayavati. This would have fitted into that session about each of those women. Their biographers were in that session. So have you seen you were talking about women politicians in the book. This was an important observation, I thought, in the whole book.
It's funny you say that, because they talk about the mad woman theory of Indian politics, that somehow all the women who do well in Indian politics are a little mad. But frankly, you need to be mad as a woman to enter politics, because the kind of pressures you face and the kind of resistance you face, you have to be a little bit insane to want to do that. So I'm not surprised at all that whether it's Malavika Banerjee or Mayavati or Jayalalitha, they're all seen as mercurial, they're seen as high-handed, they're seen as mad. Because you need to be that to be able to work in the system that we have of politics today.
And very, very unpredictable, as you said. They
Absolutely.
just have to be...
They have to keep people off balance to be able to make a difference, I think.
Okay, so before I open it out to the audience, you've left each chapter at a precipitous moment, and you've left the whole novel at a very, very critical moment, which is, of course, I read it when I had Omicron, so that added to my frustration of being incarcerated there. I was wondering what happens next to Asha Devi and her clan. So when is the next book coming out?
Well, I'm taking a little bit of a break because I'm in the middle of writing a spy novel. So I'm going to finish that, and then I'm going to come back to Asha Devi and take the story forward. So there's going to be a little bit of a break.
So what are the different challenges in this, the spy novel?
I was actually working on the spy novel before I started writing Racecourse Road, and I kind of gave it up about 3/4 of the way. So because I wanted to do the political thriller first, and then I got into writing the sequel. So now I want to go back and do it, finish it, and then come back to Asha Devi, because I think I need to give her a little time to kind of find her feet and then get back and see what she's doing.
So speaking about spy thrillers and indeed political thrillers, it's a gap in our publishing that we don't have more of them. We have this rich culture of political personalities who have marvelous idiosyncrasies and great stories of magnificent rises and totally abysmal falls after that. So what do you think prevents people from exploring the genre more?
Money, I think. There's no money in books in India.
That's like Corona, and this particular strain, what is the problem with?
I don't know. I mean, I really haven't really thought about it. But you're absolutely right. There aren't that many people writing spy thrillers or whatever. But, you know, we have a pretty nascent publishing scene, at least in English. I mean, the vernacular languages, they're far more advanced. But it's a very small market. And I think over the next decade, probably we'll have a lot more people working in those genres.
And who are your favorites across globally in these genres?
For spy thrillers, John le Carre, of course. I like Daniel Silva. I don't know if you read him. He does a whole series on this Israeli spy called Gabriel Allon, which is great fun. I like Charles McCarry. I like reading a lot of mysteries and stuff. I love reading Donna Leon, who bases her books in Venice, which is one of my favorite cities. So I have quite a lowbrow.
No, a well-written thriller is always a joy.
I love them, yes,
There's
absolutely.
nothing lowbrow about it at all. Are there any questions before I... yes, I see the mics have sprung into action. Are there any questions, or I have a couple more which I can continue with?
There's somebody at
Yes,
the back.
there's someone at the back, yes.
Hello, ma'am. I have got two questions. The first question is, when you talk about women in politics, over the years we have seen like there are a number of women who have, active participation has been there. There has been Jayalalitha, and even in your state, like Sheila Dikshit and stuff like that. But right now, if we see, there are very few women in Indian politics right now making the top 1%. Like making it to the top quarters. Even in Delhi, we have people like Atishi Marlena only, So why do you think when politics is the field, it has reduced, like which should be the opposite in the case? And my second question to you is, especially pertaining to television journalism, do you think the condition right now, the situation right now in the television journalism in India, would it change in 5 or 10 years, or would there be an alternative, or would it stop to exist at all? Or unacceptable to the generations to come?
You mean TV journalism would cease to exist?
No, the generations to come would not watch it as
Maybe
it is
a new
as popular.
format, would happen.
Okay.
Right.
It's the first women,
Take your first question first. I don't think that few women in politics. You have Vasundhara Raje, who, lost an election last time, but it's quite possible she'll be back as Rajasthan Chief Minister. You have Smriti Irani, who is a pretty high-profile politician in the BJP. I don't think that, you have Malavika Banerjee, of course. I agree with you that Mayawati is not doing that well, and it's become more between Akhilesh or whatever. But, if you look at the lower rungs of politics, you have Mahua Mitra, who's doing very well. So there are a lot of Supriya Sule of the NCP. There are a lot of women politicians. They may not be at the top rung of their parties because they are still run by men, but it's not like there are no women who have made a mark.
Before we go to his second question, one thing I wanted to ask you was there's a certain moment, without giving too much away, where Asha Devi is humiliated publicly in a way by a leakage of photographs. So do you think that is, that was an extreme case, but do you think the way we treat women and humiliate them, and there's also, is beti ko hatao, so the misogyny that is inherent in some of the political sloganeering.
You see it in Bengal as well. There are these young MPs from the TMC who've come from the film world, and every single time you go on Twitter, somebody's putting pictures of them wearing revealing clothes from their film days and trying to diss them for it. What is the point? Sure, they've been film stars, but they're politicians now. But this is the way people behave. They try to shame them for what they did before.
Okay. And his second question was, No, it's all yours.
You can take that.
Well, I'll just briefly say, and then you'll also have to answer that. I think with Twitter and social media, there's going to be another transformation, another way we get news. I am still an old timer. I have 4 newspapers coming home, and I don't watch news television. I used to till there was more to news than politics alone and these slanging matches. So with the current format of where news television is and where social media is headed, what do you think? I'm just kind of paraphrasing what the young gentleman was asking.
Well, I don't think that TV channels are going to disappear anytime soon, but I do take the point that the younger generation is not that into television. They get their news from social media, you know, from Twitter and things like that. In fact, I was just reading an article about somebody, a young person who was interviewed, not in India, abroad, but I think it applies to India as well, and who said he didn't read any newspapers and didn't watch any news channels. So they said, how do you get to know what's happening in the world? So he says, well, if the news really matters, it'll find a way to find me, because it'll turn up on Facebook or it'll turn up on Instagram, and that's how we'll follow it. So I think there's a lot of, I mean, there's no appointment viewing in the younger generation. They don't turn on the news at 9 o'clock to see the headlines like maybe we did when we were young. But I think the nature of news may change, but people will always be interested in the news, whether it's on the internet, whether they're watching YouTube channels. In fact, there are a lot of young journalists who are kind of disillusioned with the way mainstream media is working, who have gone on to create their own YouTube channels and have developed a huge following. I mean, there's Sahil Megnani, there's Abhisar Sharma. All of them have YouTube channels which they run on very little money, and they kind of do a lot of news reporting that even established channels don't do. So I don't think that the news media is going to disappear. I think its shape is going to change.
Absolutely. Which brings me to another aspect of this book, is the dynamics between these two worlds, the political class as well as and the media, how they subtly take revenge on each other, and there's the politicians use the competition between media houses and television anchors. So this dynamic between the politicians and the media, is it something that is as fascinating? I mean, has it remained fascinating right through your career?
Well, it is quite fascinating. In fact, it's changed quite a lot because initially when I started journalism, there was a lot of openness in politicians to deal with journalists. I won't call it access journalism exactly, but we certainly had a lot of access to people. They were open to being interviewed. They were open to kind of giving information. But I think over the last 6 or 7 years, there has been a kind of resistance to opening up to the media, unless it's a media channel that you're sure will be covering you favorably. So there's, I mean, the Prime Minister hasn't given a press conference in 7 years. So that should tell us something about where the media stands in this present dispensation. So of course the relationship has changed, and journalism now has to be done in a very different way from the way it was done before.
Okay. There's one question right here.
So the comment you made about the mad woman theory in politics, it made me wonder whether we in the media, in fact, are responsible in part for when the same quality is shown in a male politician, we tend to call them wily, cunning, shrewd. When a woman shows those same qualities, then they become regarded as sort of mad or kind of mercurial and sort of emotionally volatile in a way.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're quite right. There's a lot of inherent misogyny in the way the media deals with women politicians. I mean, the kind of things you read about Mayawati or Malavika Banerjee, you rarely read about male politicians. You're quite right about that.
Yeah, we had a whole session on this.
Yeah.
There's one hand there.
Hi, am I audible?
A little louder, please.
I just have 2 questions. They're slightly more theoretical. When in Racecourse Road you saw that the son, Karan, is kind of struggling to keep up his position after his father's assassination. It's believed that you took inspiration from Indian politics only.
Can
but-
you put your mic a little closer? Yeah.
Sorry, yes. While it's believed that you took inspiration from Indian politics, the theme that the son or the offspring succeeds the parent, even in politics, is something that you see in almost the entire subcontinent. It's a region phenomenon, while you don't see this in the West. Here, a prime minister's son becoming the next prime minister simply by succeeding the party is just extremely common, but you don't see that anywhere
So
else.
we'll just take that one question, if that's all right, and if we have time, we'll come back to you for the next
So
one.
why is this
Yeah,
difference there?
dynasty politics.
Why is that so? Well, I think part of it is that we are essentially a very feudal society. That it's not just politics. I mean, a doctor's son takes over his practice, a businessman's son succeeds him. We are essentially a very feudal society in which things pass down in the family, and politics is also seen as a family business, unfortunately, and that's how it works.
Okay, I think we have time for another question. There's the lady again, so if we don't have another one, we'll go back to her. It's the same lady, I think. That's the same lady.
So my second question was that writing a thriller is probably the most difficult, because unlike a film, an action sequence can't just be inserted anywhere. It has to be fast-paced. It can't just be accompanied by a very thrilling music score. So did you have any reservations when you began writing your political thriller?
No, not really.
In fact, one of the best things about reading a thriller is that music isn't there. Which is manipulating your excitement. It's calm and it's quiet.
Absolutely.
Yes, the book is not calm and quiet, so please do buy it. And if we don't have any questions, I'd just like to say that Seema's book is available outside. Both the books are available outside. Please do. There's one question. Yeah, quick. Yeah. Oh. It is
No,
there. I saw it
is.
upstairs. It is
is.
very much there. So just check.
It is. I've signed some copies. so
Yes, it is
it's
there. Oh, it may have sold out, which is absolutely
Well, that's
delightful.
great.
So, yes. Well, this is the festival that sells out your book, so
Yeah,
you must come back
always
for
happy
that,
to be
as
here.
well as the joy of being at Victoria Memorial, which sadly you couldn't
No,
experience.
I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, well,
The air
fantastic.
conditioning helps.
Spoken like somebody from the Racecourse Road. So please do catch her book and the sequel. They're both fabulous, and if I have a slight partiality towards the second one, but both books are a great read, and do enjoy them. And thank you,
Thank you
Seema.
so much.
Thank you for a wonderful
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank
and
you so
hope to
much.
see you back at the festival.
Thank you. And thank you. You've been a brilliant audience. Thank you so much.